which climb to mountain ranges where vultures fly. A hot sun burning the rock and blistering the few tarmac roads. A landscape of smoky blue and biscuit color, darkening into harsh cliffs washed by a warm southern sea. An island fastness for rare and beautiful creatures. Eleonora's falcon, a relative of our peregrine, but even scarcer. There are only 2,000 pairs in the world today. The bee-eater, which bores into sandbanks to make its nest. Marmora's warbler, which lurks in the thickets, a tiny local tribe. Black-winged stilts, ultra-rare in Britain, but a prominent part of the scene here. Lilford's wall lizard, found nowhere else, a type peculiar to the island. Orduin's gull, possibly the rarest gull of all, always restricted to this region.
Está en Majorca, cada noche brillan sobre el mar, las estrellas y la luna llena, gritando a soñar, con los besos nacen.
Majorca is the island off the east coast of Spain which has become almost as familiar as Blackpool or Saint-Tropez to tourists on trippers. The jet age has scooped Majorca into Europe's back garden. In the season, the planes are in and out of Palma Airport like double-deckers in Piccadilly Circus. 10 years ago, when the boom began, 360,000 foreign visitors came. Now the numbers are up fivefold, 1.25 million a year. A human tide surging onto those advertised beaches, drinking the enticingly cheap brandy in the shiny new cafes and the super hotels, recording the local color on color film. In they whisk for their crash spellbinding program in Mediterranean magic, and out they go with tender memories of moonlit nights and tender areas of sunburn. They see a great deal of each other. Do they see much of Majorca?
Every day is Sunday in Majorca. Every night the stars shine in the sky. Every moment the waves caress Majorca. Everything is wonderful. With the kisses grow flowers in Majorca, while the birds are singing lovely songs. Everyone is happy in Majorca. I have found the paradise of Majorca.
Yet it's a thin layer of modernity. Behind the front of discotheques and souvenir shops, the traditional life still moves in much the same groove and at much the same pace as it's ever done. Wind pumps stand like giant storks spinning in the high hot winds, drawing up the water, which of course is the key to an existence in such a dry region. And surprisingly, there's plenty once you're through that rocky Rhine. The wind pumps and those worked by horses draw up the water from its underground gullies. The irrigation ditches reach like conjurer's fingers across the soil, materializing the green growth spread so blessedly, yet so unwarrantably on a chunk of limestone where the winter is brief and summer everlastingly hot. Not only the farmers benefit. Where there's wetness, look for frogs. You'll hear them anyway if you walk out of range of the jukeboxes. The marsh frogs serenade their own kind all the night through by blowing interminable raspberries. Majorca is an island fruitful with fruit, and under the tree's shade grow the ground crops. Through the year comes the bounty of figs, grapes, tangerines, apricots, peaches, pomegranates, and olives. The 1,000-year-old olive trees are stalwarts, almost indestructible, toughly impervious to drought. Pamper an olive tree, it's said, and spoil the fruit. They go unpampered. Almonds shower down to be eaten and sold, large consignments to Britain. In blossom time, they look romantically lovely to the visitor passing in buses on the new concrete highways. To local farmers, they are hard, nutty cash, for when the tourist season closes, the almond trees stay rooted. This is an older harvest. Tourism has brought in money much needed in an economy where wages are still counted in shillings. Younger labourers go into the mushrooming resort towns and work as waiters. So gypsies are imported from Andalusia to collect the crops. The fig, brought from Africa in the Middle Ages, took happily to the climate, and Majorcans took happily to the fig. The pasha with two tails, a local butterfly, sucks up the sugary residue of ripe fruits, already partly de-gutted by blackcaps and Sardinian warblers. Other insects are garnering their food. The harvester ant in Europe, found only on Mediterranean shores, whose economy is built mainly on seed gathering. But in a competitive environment where seeds run short, they mince up grass and leaves as well. The paper wasp, if not man's best friend here, is his close companion. They make a nest as strong as cardboard by chewing rotten wood and plant stems. Some expatriates who spotted Majorca when it was still unspoiled, as they say, look with sour eye on the massed tourists as flocks of locusts devouring their private delights of peace and privacy. But your actual locusts were already here, their mandibles busy cutting down to stomach size anything within sight of their science fiction eyes. Locusts reckoned with, there's enough to go around from Majorca's resourcefully used acres to fill the markets. But this is the kind of market not dealing in mementos and olive wood trinket boxes which temporary visitors don't see much of. The unglamorous, the routine, the ordinariness is always there, but what's the market value of that? On an average Majorcan day out in the scrubland where the villas and swimming pools stop short, the sheep bite off whatever pokes up through the stony ground. Majorca is the biggest of the 15 Balearic Islands, about the size of Cornwall. You can drive 80 miles across it. Even today, the internal combustion engine hasn't altogether ousted a somewhat older means of transport. Mule carts and donkey carts, which at least get you across the rougher tracks without a flat tire. The mule, untrendy and unimaginative vehicle whose styling remains stodgily the same, continues to give as reliable service as any in the offing to the Majorcan peasant. The way you get a mule is also a well-tried line of manufacture. You mate a horse with a donkey, and you thereupon are furnished with a mule. The mule foal here is still with the mare, which is its mother. And it's up here on the barren foothills not covered by the coach strips where you can see some other visitors to Majorca, those who come from the tropics on their own wings, birds like the pratinco. And the wheatear, twitching its white rump among the boulders, just as it does on England's downlands. The cutting and the curving of the house martins above the rooftops as they hawk for winged insects. Here's one bird which should hold no acrimony toward the buildings shooting up along Majorca's seashore. The hotels are intended to bring in the dollars and the Deutschmarks and the pound sterling, but they also provide free accommodation for the martins which sling their mud igloos under the eaves. Originally cliff dwellers, they've adjusted to the wider selection offered by the cliffs man builds from bricks and cement. Many house martins stay and nest in Majorca. Others use it as a halt and refreshment kiosk in a much longer expedition from Africa to northern Europe, perhaps to the market towns and the gabled houses of the British, who will soon be setting off in the opposite direction. Conversely, with so much bird life free about them, there are those who like to see it closer and confined, a goldfinch behind bars, hung up to see the boundless yet impenetrable sky. It's a pretty bird to have at your fingertip, and it sings prettily, but not its light way from happiness. There are stranger choices for forcibly detained pets. Somebody, somewhere, netted this Sardinian warbler, a bird shyer and wilder still than a goldfinch, and to whom a cage seems even less comprehensible. Not all the birds of Majorca are caged or shot. Hard luck on bees, but no one's bothering these bee-eaters. A rainbow of a bird which would stand scant chance of lying low even if it wished. It sits boldly on wires and branches, swooping out in zigzag flight to snap up its prey in mid-air. They nest in gregarious ghettos, digging their tunnels, male and female joining in the job, in river banks and sandpits in which, like other hole nesters, they lay white eggs. Bee-eaters have occasionally nested in Britain. Down here, they're common enough to avoid a special attention. As its name makes generously clear, the bee-eater likes bees. It has, as a species, been long enough at catching bees to know how to kill the bee before the bee stings. As bees are its particular delectation, the presentation of bees by the male to the female is a significant part of the courtship ritual, an offering which leads with graceful logic to the mating of the pair. The male bee-eater does have lapses of gallantry. He may change his mind and eat the bee himself. The bee-eater could hardly be missed by the most unornithological tourist. Yet there are so many other birds which feed where the fancy takes them and ignore the nearness of the holiday-making hubbub, and probably are reciprocally ignored or unnoticed by the holiday-makers, such as these little stints on the roadside wasteland. They pause here a while to feed while en route from Africa to northwest Russia. The fact that hotels have been put up on the boggy stretches where they've been accustomed to fish hasn't, yet at any rate, afflicted these little egrets, a bird much persecuted in the past for its dazzling white plumes. And while people stroll in the adjoining street, An osprey sails above the lake on a fishing trip, for this magnificent bird of prey is also known as the fishhawk. Once established as a member of the British list, then exterminated by gillies and egg collectors, but now making a spectacular comeback in the Scottish Highlands, it might, with luck, now be seen patrolling a loch, and then making this dramatic headlong plunge upon a fish. It's a method of hunting reminiscent of the kestrels, the winnowing flight, the pauses for hovering circles, and then the drop from about 30 feet onto the quarry. But the osprey kills bigger stuff than voles and mice. It usually comes up from its mighty splash, sometimes completely submerging, with its claws embedded deep in the flanks of a hefty fish, which is borne off, head pointing to the front, to a tree or rock for the meal. The osprey is still, in Majorca, a widely distributed bird, but it's a bird which may fall back as the pressure of people increases. This doesn't seem on the cards for the hoopoe. As conspicuous in a different psychedelic color scheme as the bee-eater, this pink and jazzily striped bird with a crest like a Red Indian's headdress is almost idiotically tame. It's as much a hanger-on of man as the house martin and the house sparrow, and nests in holes anywhere. It's a nest best not to inspect too inquisitively, an evil stinking mitten of rotting vegetation and debris of worms, ants and cricket grubs. The hoopoe is very much a bird of the Latin landscape. It figures in inscriptions on tombs and temples stretching from Egypt to Crete. It was a symbol in magic formulae, and soothsayers recommended preparations of hoopoe as a sure corrective to both bad eyesight and bad memory. Its habits may not be all that's desirable from a sanitary inspector's standards, but it's a picturesque and hippyish neighbour to have around. And have it we would in Britain, had it not been for the scurvy reception it's had from potshotters and taxidermists whenever it shows up. It's its easy-going confidence which has been the hoopoe's undoing in Britain. Here in Majorca, it's such a common farmyard fowl, a squatter anywhere, that it lives undisturbed and unconcerned, even among the new flat blocks and the roads where lorries lumber past. Seaweed is used as animal bedding and soil fertilizer, and gives the local wine a taste of violets. The seashore of Majorca isn't yet completely spotted with awnings and the bikini brigade. There are bits unsullied by suntan oil. Where the seaweed is collected are the salinas, where another harvest is gathered from the sea, salt. The water is channeled inland to a chain of salt pans and dammed in pools. The sun's heat and the dry winds evaporate the water, and as the salt content becomes more and more concentrated, it's fed onward from pan to pan. By late summer, the salt remains in thick crusts ready for shoveling up and carrying away. It must be the hottest job going. The sweltering heat, the blinding glare, the sweat, the salt itself. And here comes the equivalent to the English tea trolley, the welcome water boy. The salt is used mostly in local soap manufacture, but now probably more than a pinch finds its way into the tourist fish and chip shops. But the salinas attract more than the men who get their living from salt. Pools and creeks swarm with water insects and marine lowlife. Sandhoppers, sea slaters, pond skaters. Long-headed flies mass together on patches of floating vegetation and feed voraciously on other insects. From this teeming life, fishermen select their bait. But all these animals are potential food for an enormous variety of creatures which live around or pass through the salt pans. There's food for dragonflies here and breeding nurseries for them. After mating, they remain in tandem, and the eggs are injected just under the surface of the water in a combined operation of delicate precision. There's an endless chain here of death feeding life, in the richness of this part of Majorca which goes undescribed in the guidebooks, but where the bird population prospers. The white-winged black tern, one of the many types of passage migrant terns. They perform a meticulous operation of flight refueling, dipping only the very tip of the bill into the surface. Feeding at a slightly deeper level is the whiskered tern, so called because of the white mustachio streaks down its face. The little tern is an even deeper plunger. He's after fish, not insects. And the flocks of black terns. The salinas of Majorca are a major staging post for countless thousands of migrant birds on their twice-yearly spanning of the northern and southern hemispheres. A provisioning warehouse where the travelers on these immense journeys rest and refresh themselves. a link which over the ages has helped to form the pattern of the migrational air lanes. Curlew sandpipers on their way to Lapland and Arctic Russia. Wood sandpipers bound for Poland, though some may swing west to the sewage farms and the mud flats of the British Isles. The marsh sandpiper returning perhaps to the steppes of Romania. Redshanks heading for Scandinavia and the water meadows of our own countryside. A ruff on its way north too, a few of them perhaps to Britain, where recently they made a comeback after an absence of 100 years, an absence caused by gourmets and egg collectors. The Kentish plover, another bird we've lost. It bred skimpily in Kent and Sussex up to 1956, but no longer. Here in Majorca it stays to breed, as may be seen from the territorial belligerency being exhibited by this cock, staking out his claim in the face of any try-on by rivals. The Spanish yellow wagtail finds breeding cover in the salicornia scrub which fringes the salt pans. They frequently walk the weeds in search of food. Also feeding a hungry family is the fantail warbler. This tiny African bird makes a delicate gossamer ball of a nest suspended deep in the vegetation. Of all the rather dull-looking but brightly singing warblers, the Sardinian is one of the commonest in Majorca. Now and then, blown off course on migration, the Sardinian warbler has crossed our boundaries. But not so the marble teal, a duck which breeds in southern Spain, but which is here bringing off its first recorded set of young in Majorca. Another game for Majorca could be the little egret. They're seen often enough, even from those hotel windows, but so far have come to Majorca only as callers. Given enough careful protection, they might decide to nest in the trees fringing the salinas. The chain of one creature supporting another by becoming sustenance for its belly is carried one link further by the birds of prey, which follow the migrant hordes into the salinas. The harriers with wings like enormous moths, which float with a deceptive inconsequentiality above the reed beds and the salt flats. They nest here down in the damp tangle and rear their young on anything grabbed from the bog below, a dragonfly or a moorhen, and doubtless the young of the black-winged stilt. The stilt, 5 of which once blew into a Nottingham sewage farm and set up a freak little settlement, is one of the dominant birds of the Majorca salinas. Dominant because of both its extraordinarily vivid plumage and its raucous objection to any trespassing. Of course, no bird with legs like that could escape notice. Those pink-hinged, extravagant extremities. 10 inches of leg on 13 inches of bird is outside the general run of blueprints. Why did the stilt, one wonders, literally go to such lengths? Although, as with all waders, long legs are a bonus of paddling about to snap up the beetles and tadpoles it likes, In the stilt's case, the height from which it has to stoop seems to make an unpleasant dislocation imminent. Yet in flight, the legs retract with great elegance and exactitude and fold into a sort of supplementary rudder. The Kentish plovers are not the only birds in warlike temper during these spring days. The stilts are sparring to demonstrate their rights over zones of indistinguishable ooze. Well, not indistinguishable to the stilts. But with gregarious birds, when the colonies are tightly packed, the demarcation lines are all the more finely drawn and fiercely fought over. Preparations for the reproductive cycle go into their elaborate sequence. When the nesting site has been chosen, the ceremonial of mating is performed. In the animal world, a face-to-face approach normally means attack. In mating, birds have to demonstrate to each other by a ritual of posturing and gesturing that now it's love, not war. The nest is built, the eggs laid, brooding begins. When the threat of a human being appears, the stilt's preoccupation with their internal bickering and upstaging switches to solidarity against the common enemy.